Okay, so now we are ready to start sewing, and you might notice that my front piece looks a little different from yours, and that's because I updated the pattern. So instead of refilming the whole tutorial because the sewing steps are the same, I'll show you the little updates and how to sew them. So with this original pattern, I used side bust darts, which only shape the bust. But with the new and improved pattern, I use French darts, which shape both the bust and the waist since it's longer and more angled. And of course, I love all things French, so it makes sense why I would use a French dart. But honestly, it gives such a nicer fit, and actually, I feel like it's easier to sew. So I'll show you how to sew it. So the first step is to take the front piece and with the right side facing down, actually let me zoom in here so we can see it closer. So with the right side of the fabric facing down, you should have marked 2 notches. So one for this side of the dart, one for this side of the dart, and then a mark here for the dart point. And I will grab my pin so that we can start pinning the dart together to sew it. So you will take right sides together and you will match these 2 notches and pin. And I also like to put a pin where that dart point is so that way I know where to stop sewing. And if you want to, you can add another pin just in the center there. And now we are ready to go sew, and we'll start here and we'll go diagonally and stop at that dart point. And once you're done sewing, this is what the 2 French darts will look like from the outside. And then from the inside, this is what we have. So we sewed from here all the way to here. And this side, we did the same. Now for the seam allowance of the dart, you do have some options. The first one is going to be just to serge the seam allowance here. There is another option which I like to use, and that's just simply to take the seam allowance, and what you will do is you will fold it down and then you can iron it. And then there is a third one if you want to, and that's to trim the dart. So grab some snippers like this. And so what you'll do is you will cut up into that dart point. So not past it, but just to it. So you have to be very, very careful. And then what you can do at this point is to basically take the seam allowance and open it, and then you can press it. And once you press or iron it, it will look like this. And now, even if you wanted to, you can go in and serge either side of that seam allowance. But to be honest, there's a few options, so it's completely up to you and what you feel comfortable with. Okay, and now for the last little update. It's going to make sewing the side seam so much easier. So what I did was I squared off the neckline at the side seam on both the front and back pattern pieces, so that way they line up nicely. So before on my original pattern, the back neckline at the side seam had this sharp little corner happening, but now it's squared off so it matches perfectly with the front. So that's it for the updates. So from here, we're jumping back into the original tutorial I filmed before I made these changes. So remember, if you notice something looking a tad different, don't worry, that's why. Okay, so now we will begin to work on the back. And if you are following along with the sewing guide, we are on step 5, okay? So here we have our 2 back pieces. So now we will take our 2 back pieces and we will lay them with right sides together, okay? And so you should have a notch here on the center back. And so we will pin and sew from this notch all the way down to the bottom here, okay? And we will leave this section open because we will be sewing our zipper here. Okay, so let's pin. Okay, so let's go sew it. And once you are done sewing the seam, it will look like this. And so for our next step, we can iron the center back seam open. Just like this. And once it is pressed and ironed, it will look like this. And if you want, at this point, you can also serge either side of that seam allowance there, okay? And also from the outside, this is what we have so far, okay? So it looks like it's coming together quite nicely. So our next step is going to be to sew our zipper in. And we're just gonna sew our zipper just right here. But before we sew our zipper in, I wanna show you how I like to prepare my invisible zipper, okay? So here I've already started to prepare my zipper, and the reason why my zipper is curved is because I ironed it. So a trick that I like to do is actually to lay the zipper flat and iron it. So what you want to do is you want to iron those zipper teeth this way towards the middle and just press them flat, obviously not using too much heat, but just enough to get them nice and flat. And then you do the same to the other side as well. And it's important that the zipper is face down while you do it. So again, what you'll do is you'll just iron it towards the middle there. And I have a more in-depth sewing tutorial for my Coucou mini dress. And I'll place a link in the description box below so you can see how I iron it and how I do all the things to prepare my zipper. So basically the idea is that when we sew the zipper on, we will be able to get that sewing needle just right next to those zipper teeth. And this makes the zipper super invisible, okay? So actually the next step that we will do is completely optional. But for this design, I will trim the zipper ribbon. From the top here to where the zipper begins is about 3/4 of an inch. So I will trim about 1/4 of an inch off the top zigzaggy part there, okay? Again, it's completely optional, but what I'll do is I'll measure, mark, and then cut. Okay, so I will measure from where the zipper begins. I will measure 1/2 of an inch. And there is where I will mark. And the same for this side. Where that zipper begins, we measure a half of an inch and mark. So we'll just cut off that top 1/4 of an inch there off the top. Okay, so now our zipper is prepared and ready to be sewn. So we'll place it on the side and we will grab our center back. And so what I like to do, just to make sure I'm sewing it correctly, because I have sewn many zippers the wrong way in the past, what I like to do is to take the zipper and I just like to make sure that this is the front of the zipper. And I just visualize what the zipper will look like once sewn, okay? So as we know, this seam allowance would be folded a half of an inch like this. And then this zipper would just go here like this. Right? So once it's sewn correctly, it would look like this. Right? So then what I do is once I imagine it or visualize it, I then take that and then I just flip it like so. So once we have our positioning perfect, we can then pin it in place, right? So the reason why I do this is the only thing that helps me because in the past I have sewn zippers just backwards, sewn the left side of the zipper to the right side of the seam allowance. It's just been a mess. So I always just take a few moments before I sew the zipper in just to like imagine like what it would look like sewn correctly and then literally just pin it from there. Okay, so now we are ready to sew, and what we will do is we will move this side's seam allowance out of the way, and we will go to the sewing machine with my invisible zipper foot, and I'm just going to sew just right along those zipper teeth and just a little past where that center back seam begins. Okay. Again, we are just sewing right along here. All right, so let's go sew. And once you've sewn this side of the zipper, it will look like this. And as you can see, I just sewed right along those zipper teeth. And here is the invisible zipper foot that I used for my industrial machine. And as you can see here, there is a little section there where the needle goes, and that's how you were able to get super close there. And I'll put a link in the description box for a universal one for the home sewing machine as well. Okay, so this is what we have so far. And as you can see, it looks completely invisible. It looks just like a seam, and that's what we want, so that's good. And now let's do the other side. And I actually like to start at the bottom going up. So what we can do is just move this out of the way. And then you can take the edge of the ribbon here and you can line it up with the edge of the seam allowance here. So you will line these two edges up here, and then we will pin it in place. And we will go to the sewing machine starting from the bottom up. We will sew from here all the way to here and using the same zipper foot. So let's go sew. So we have sewed this side of the zipper from bottom to the top. And this is what it will look like. And this is what it looks like from the outside. So now let's test the zipper. Let's see if it zips. Okay, so it zips up. And it zips down. We have ourselves a zipper. And okay, if you are following along with our sewing guide, we are on step 12, which is to sew the side seams. And as you can see here, we have our back with our zipper. And here is the front piece. And what we will do, we will lay it face down on top of the back with the right sides together. And you have 2 notches here. And we will match those 2 notches on the front and the back like so. And we will match those side seams and pin in place. So let's pin. And I'll start from the bottom here. Be sure to match those notches. Okay, and so for here, the back is just going to go a little bit past the front there. So this side is done, and we will sew from here all the way to here with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Okay, so let's pin the other side here. And just make sure everything is nice and flat. And we'll sew this side seam. And if you want, you can sew it from this side. And once you are done sewing, it will look like this. And here are the seams. And at this point, you can actually serge the side seams if you like. And let's see what it looks like from the outside. And this is what we have so far, and it's looking good. and it's coming together nicely. And now we will begin to work on our back loops. So here are our back loops, and they're just the really small loops there, and we will use them to pass our straps through. So then that way we could wear our straps in different ways and it makes the dress more versatile. Okay, so let's begin to sew them. And it's going to be made with a really small pattern piece that we have here, and it will be cut 1 and with a 1/4 seam allowance. So you can cut it now, or you could have already cut it. It's super small, so you could use just any scrap of fabric that you have left. And if you are following along, we are on step 13. So this is what we will be doing next, okay? So what you're going to do is you will take this, and with right sides together, you will fold it in half like so. And then you will go and sew with a 1/4 seam allowance, which is usually just the edge of your purse or foot. So if you want to, you can put a pin in it just to keep it folded. And let's go sew. And once it's sewn, it will look like this. And so here in the instructions, as you can see here, our next step is to turn this back loop right side out, okay? And in the instructions, I included a loop turner, but I wanted to show you another way, and then that way you could decide which method you like best. So I'll use a safety pin, okay? So the first step is to open the safety pin. Okay, and then what you will do is you will insert the safety pin inside of this tube here, like so. And then you will close that safety pin. And then the next step is to insert the safety pin inside of the tube. So you will push it right through there, and you will pull the fabric over like so. So push it through and pull. So once it is all the way pulled through, we have this, and you can take the safety pin out. And now we have our back loop here. And at this point, if you want, you can go and actually press it with an iron, which I'll go and do. And now we have our press back loop, okay? And now the next step is to cut it in half. So we will literally just fold it in half and cut. And now you have your 2 loops, and we will fold them like this, and we will sew them to either side of the back of the dress. So we are ready to sew our back loops on, and we are on step 16. So get your back loops, and we will sew them on. So for this, we will have to turn this inside out. Okay, and we have a back notch here. Okay, so what we will do is we will take our back loop, we will fold it in half, and basically we will place it where that notch is, and we will pin it in place. And we will go to the sewing machine, and what we will do is we'll just sew right along this edge here, okay? So just right there. And if you want, we can unzip this zipper. It may be easier to sew. And we will lay it flat on our sewing machine and we will sew it, okay? Now let's pin the other side. Okay, so let's go sew it. And once you are done sewing, it will look like this. And I have a chopstick to show you that this is a fully functioning loop. We did a good job, y'all. And again, at this point, you can serge the side seams or zigzag stitch them. You can also press the seams open with your iron, and then you can serge that seam allowance, all right? But let's move on to the next step. So turn your dress right side out. And the next step is going to be to place a little clip at center front. So you are going to cut just a little clip here. And this little cut here will allow our bias tape at our neckline to cross, okay? So what you can do is measure, mark, and then cut. Or if you want to, you can eyeball it and cut. It's really up to you. I think for me, I'll just quickly measure 1/4 of an inch from the top there and mark with a pin before I cut. And so I will start snipping at 1/4, but if more is needed, I can always snip a little more. So I'll get my scissors and we will do a tiny little cut here. So we have our tiny little cut there. And let's get into this bias tape. So this is the pre-made bias tape that I will be using for this tutorial. And again, y'all, it was love at first sight. Um, and I got it from Marche St. Pierre, and this store is worth mentioning, okay? It is one of the most well-known fabric stores in Paris. It's in the 18th arrondissement, and it's right near the beautiful Sacré-Cœur Basilica. It's iconic, and a lot of people go there to visit the fabric store, but I feel like few go to the mercery across the street. It's so a mercery in France is like a haberdashery in England. It is basically where you get all your notions. So your bias tapes, your trimmings, zippers, elastic, threads, buttons. And this is actually where I got my bias tape. So they actually have an online store. So what I will do is I'll place a link in the description box below for their website. But whenever you get a chance to visit Paris, I definitely recommend visiting Marche St. Pierre. So this is the pattern for the front and back bias binding. So of course you would use this pattern to cut the bias binding out of the fabric of your choice. But if you choose to use pre-made bias tape, what you will do is you will get your bias tape, and then from there you will line it up with this pattern piece, and then you will measure, and then you will cut. And this piece is cut too. So now we have one side of our bias binding. And so now we will do the same and cut again for the other side. And now we have our two bias bindings cut. Okay, I also want to show you if you're making your bias tape from scratch, this is how I like to make it. So get your fabric piece, the one that you cut out with your other pieces, and according to the instructions, one way that you can make your bias tape is to do it manually. So what you'll do is with the wrong side facing up here, you will take this and fold it in half, okay? And then after you fold it in half, you will press it with your iron, okay? And then after you press it, you will have an indentation line in the middle. And then from there, you will fold this side and line it up to where that middle indentation line is. And then you will iron that as well. And then last, you will fold this side to the middle, and then you will iron that as well. And then from there, if you wanted to, you could fold it in half again. And you can do it this way, but it takes a lot of patience. Okay, so I'll show you a tool that I like to use that I got from Amazon, and I'll place a link in the description box below for it. But I got a set of bias makers, a set of bias tape makers, actually. So they have a lot of different sizes based on your project. And these bias tape makers will literally make the bias tape for you, okay? So I'll show you how it works, and I'll be using this 12mm one for this tutorial, okay? So what we'll do is we will put these on the side and get your fabric here. And the first step is to insert your fabric into this bias tape maker. So just insert it like so. And if you're having trouble, you can get a pen. And just ease it through there. And on the top here, they have a little opening, right? And so what you can do is you can get your pen and kind of ease that fabric through there. So just ease it through there. And you can also ease it out from the front. Okay, we got it. So next you will get a pin and you will pin it at the beginning on both sides, like so. And so this will basically hold it in place. And this is where this little handle comes in handy. So what you'll do is you'll grab your iron, and as you pull just very gently, you will go in and iron. So pull and iron as you go. So as you can see, it's literally creating the bias tape for you. And if you want, you could use a little bit of steam there. And you will continue this process for both of your bias bindings. Okay, and moving right along. So now we are ready to sew the front and back bias binding and straps. So we're going to first unzip the back here. And then we will turn this dress inside out. And then we will add our bias tape, okay? So take your bias tape, and what you will do is you will line it up with the edge here. Edge to edge. And then you will pin in place. Now go to the next section and pin. Okay, and so we are at the center front where we made that little slit there. And so I'm noticing that we may have to make the slit a little bit deeper. So then that way we could fit that bias tape on that seam allowance. Okay, so I'll just get my little snippers and I'll just make just a tiny little cut there. Okay, see, perfect. Now that bias tape fits. So just move that other side out of the way and then you can pin in place. Okay, so now we are ready to sew. We'll start from this snip side, moving the other side out of the way. And we can go to our sewing machine and then stitch all the way from here to here. Okay, and once you are done sewing, it will look like this. And we just sewed the bias tape around the back and the front up until where we made that snip. Okay, so next we will turn this right side out. And we will take this bias tape here and we will fold it down like so and then top stitch it in place. So here I am at my iron and I'm just folding and ironing the bias tape down, okay? And this is completely optional, but I really like to do it because I feel like it sets the bias tape in place and then it's more easy to sew that way. So you are going to top stitch just right along that edge there. And once you get to the strap, as you can see here, we're just going to fold it in half. So we are getting to the end here, and what we can do is we can fold this end in like so, and then we can fold it in half. But before we fold it, I think what we should do is trim the corners because it's going to give us a way neater fold. Okay, so just fold it in about 1/2 of an inch and then fold in half. And then we can iron it to keep it in place here. So now just top stitch all the way along here, all the way to the end of the strap. And once you are done sewing, it will look like this. And we sewed just right along this edge here. And I think it came out quite lovely. Okay, so one side is done. Now let's work on the other side. And when sewing, be sure to push the other strap out of the way there, so that way you are only catching this little piece here. So now let's go sew. And once you are done sewing, it will look like this. And now let's go iron again. Okay, and now when we sew, we'll start from here and then work our way all the way to the center back. So let's go sew. And once you're done sewing, it will look like this. And it looks really good. And we have our crisscross here in the front. And I will say, if you want to, at center front where the straps cross, you can add a little stitch to hold everything in place if you want. So now we're ready for the last step, which is the hem. Okay, so now we are on our final step, which is the hem. And so for the hem, I'm going to give you two options. But before we get into those options, I did want to mention always make sure that you have serger seam allowances. I know I don't because my serger has been acting up, but always make sure you do, okay? So for the first option, what you can do is you can serge this hem edge all the way around, okay? And then after you're done serging that edge there, what you can do is then you can fold this up about 1/4 or maybe half of an inch up. And then what you can do is you can just stitch right along that edge, okay? And this is a super easy way for beginners. It's super easy, it looks good, and it works. Now, for the second option, you can do a rolled hem. So that's what I will be doing using a rolled hem foot. Okay, so in my Camille dress tutorial, I showed you all the hemming foot that I use for my industrial sewing machine and how I used it. And I suggested a hemming foot for the home sewing machine that had really great ratings and that is sold on Amazon, which I'll place a link in the description box below for. So what I decided to do was to buy it and actually try it out. So as you can see here, it actually comes in 3 different sizes, okay? So the first one is going to be a really teeny tiny hem, the second one more normal, and then the third one's going to be your larger, for a bit larger hem, okay? So what we'll do is we'll use the one in the middle here, the normal size one, and it actually has a number 4 on it, okay? So as you all know, I always use my industrial machine, but I actually went out and bought a home sewing machine to try it out on. So let's try it out. And really quickly, here is an up close of each of the hemming feet. Okay, so let's get the hem fabric here. And what I like to do with the presser foot up is I like to fold the fabric here. And then I just kind of get it inside of that little channel of the foot there, like this. And so once it's inside of there, I then put my presser foot down, okay? And it's gonna be very important that you kind of push this fabric over when you sew it, okay? Now, the next step was essential for me, and that is moving the position of the needle. So initially, the needle position was at 0, and as you can see, the needle was way over here. But when I move the needle, it shifts it over, and I can catch the edge of the fold here. So we want to catch that fold there, okay? So right now, I have it at a 2.5. And here I am changing the needle position to 2.5, but you can definitely play with this to get the needle position that works best for you. So now we are ready to start sewing. And don't worry if you don't catch the fold on the first few stitches, that's completely normal. So even on the industrial machine actually. So what I normally do is I normally just get my seam ripper, seam rip those first few stitches, fold the fabric, and then manually top stitch. So for me, I feel like the foot is meant to do most of the work, and we're grateful for the foot, right? So if we miss a few stitches here and there, it's fine. Just go back and top stitch them. And as you can see here, the key is that you always make sure that you're pushing the fabric over the foot there and keeping it in place. And so far it's looking good, so let's continue. Okay, and I stopped really quickly just to see what we have, and it's looking pretty good. So this is our last step. I'm going to continue, and you do this for the rest of your hem as well. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next tutorial. Au revoir.